everyone. Welcome to another discussion on Ashram Talks. Before we get started today, I would like you to ask yourself, what if everything you believe about who you are, including your name, your story, maybe even your body, is only just a part of the picture? Today, we're going to explore this topic with author and Oxford scholar Simon Haas. And remember, this is an abstract philosophy. It's a really concrete way to navigate identity and purpose on this journey. So we'd like to welcome Simon Haas with us again today. Thank you so much for joining us, Simon.
Thank you, Sienna. It's an honor to be here today, and I'm very excited about this particular verse from the Bhagavad Gita. We're now in chapter 2, verse 12. And what are some of the key teachings we'll be exploring today? Well, one of them is discover who we really are. So Krishna's first teaching to Arjuna is a powerful invitation to remember our true self beyond confusion and fear. We are not our body or our story. So learn how identifying with the body or the mind-made self leads to suffering, and how to rise above it.
Yeah.
And tap into our inner strength. In other words, realize that our true self is undefeatable, giving us clarity, courage, and freedom in life's toughest moments. So we'll begin, as usual, with a Mangalacharana, a sacred invocation, which is a tradition before beginning studying or reading a sacred text is to have a sacred invocation that opens up a circle of wisdom. He Shri Guru Jnanadadina Bandho Svananda Data Karunaika Sindho Brindavanasi Nahitavatara Prasidha Radha Pranaya Prachara. So in some of the previous episodes that we've had, we've discussed what a Mangalacharanam is and what its purpose is. Today we have a lot to cover, so we'll move on straight to the verse we're looking at today. But before beginning, a little bit on the context of this particular verse of the Gita, verse 12 of chapter 2. So the Bhagavad Gita is about making choices, hard choices. And Arjuna is faced with a difficult choice. Should I fight? Should I not fight? Lost and confused between two great armies, he doesn't know what to do. And Krishna tells him, you don't know what to do because you don't know who you are. So Krishna's very first teaching to Arjuna is to remember who he is. Arjuna thinks he's the person who is sad, confused, and in turmoil. So Krishna explains, we're not this physical body we inhabit, which is like a garment. Neither are we our mind-made self, with all its problems and heavy burdens, which lives between the unsatisfying past and the fearful future. So the Bhagavad Gita allows us to grasp that we're not the imaginary lead character in our small human story. We're spiritual beings. And in previous episodes, we spoke about the dark night of the soul. A period of intense existential crisis, which is what Arjuna is facing. That dark night is a blessing because it can reveal this particular teaching to us if we let it. So once we know who we are, beyond our petty recurring storyline, we can act on the field of life with freedom and clarity and power. And whatever we do is then truly an expression of yoga. So turning now to verse 12. Natve vaham jatu nasam natvam neme janadipa nachaiva na bhavishyamaha sarve vayam matah param. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So, what Krishna is sharing here with Arjuna are teachings from the ancient Upanishads on the true nature of the self. And in fact, in this part of chapter 2, some of the verses are taken directly from the Upanishads, such as the Katha Upanishad, with a few changes in the wording of it. And these verses explain that the death of the body doesn't entail the death of the true self, the light of consciousness that temporarily inhabits the body. Now, here's something interesting. The knowledge of who we are is not something that we learn, but rather it's something that we remember, like a person waking up from a dream, who automatically remembers who he is or who she is. So Krishna refers in his teachings to disturbed memory. You'll see later in this chapter, he'll say, from disturbed memory comes loss of discernment. And from loss of discernment, a person becomes lost. And then at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, the end of chapter 18, after hearing Krishna's yoga teachings, Arjuna announces, my confusion is destroyed, and by your grace I have regained memory. So to regain memory is to return to a state of consciousness before we lost ourselves in our false stories and identities. On the field of life, with all its confusions and uncertainties, powerful forces of forgetfulness sweep over us, and they obscure what Krishna describes as the eye of knowledge, rendering us sightless, like the blind emperor Dhritarashtra. So Krishna will say, Pashyanti jnana chakshushaha. Those who possess the eye of knowledge can perceive the self. So this reminds me of the times that I spent in India as a young boy, altogether 15 years or so, living in India in temple monasteries. And life in a monastery is a very simple type of life. We would sleep on a straw mat on the stone floor, wake up at 3:30 or 4 a.m. and begin our meditation. But one thing about monasteries is that they don't have any full-size mirrors. So just maybe tiny handheld mirrors that are used for applying sacred clay markings to one's foreheads. Basically, monks don't spend a lot of time gazing into mirrors. It's a very simple life. We would meditate every day, withstand the heat of the summer and the cold of winter. We would walk barefoot for miles on pilgrimage. And these kinds of ancient yogic practices, they enlarge the spirit and awaken the soul. So after 5 years, I needed to return to England because I needed to renew my visa. And now, back in England, I was staying at the home of a friend. I went into the bathroom and I switched on the light, and there I saw a large mirror for the first time. In fact, this was a mirror that covered the entire wall. And it was an unusual experience. I hadn't looked into a mirror for 5 years. So the face I was looking at was unfamiliar. I ran my fingertips lightly across my mouth and cheeks, and I couldn't help but think, who is this? This mask of flesh and skin isn't me. I'm the self residing within this body for a short time, not made of destructible elements like flesh, skin, and blood. So many of us, we identify with the physical body, but our body is simply a covering, like a garment. It's the vehicle by which we, the transcendent self, express ourselves in this world. And when the self leaves the body at death, the body is inactive, like a car without a driver. So in ancient India, they often use the analogy of a chariot. Obviously, they didn't have motor cars. So the sages and seers, such as in the Katha Upanishad, they used the analogy of a chariot. We're passengers in the chariot of our body. And driven by the mind and senses, the chariot moves across the field of life, meeting pleasure and pain, gain and loss, enjoyment and suffering. Now, just as a warrior needs to feel at ease on her chariot, so also a practitioner of yoga needs to feel able to rest and feel at home in her body. We reside in this body for the time being, and we can give ourselves permission to feel comfortable in it. If we don't accept the body and mind, we struggle to find tranquility, and it becomes very difficult to practice yoga. But at the same time, it would be ludicrous for a warrior to believe that the chariot is who she is. So we know that most of the cells in the body are replaced over a period of 7 years. So that means our body of 7 years ago has been ecologically dispersed throughout the environment. This physical body is not who we are. We're not fat, thin, young, or old. These are attributes that relate only to the body. So that's actually quite easy to understand when we look at photos of our childhood. It's easy to recognize how we're distinct from the changing physical body. Rather, we're the life force that animates that body. And when people identify too closely with the body, then they begin to think strongly in terms of bodily distinctions such as black and white, male, female, Indian, American. But all of these designations refer to the body only. Now, whilst it's fairly easy to understand we're not the body on one level, it may be difficult to remember it, but we can understand that. But it's much more difficult to discern that we exist beyond the creations of the mind. So if we meditate, we might find it easier to perceive this, because meditation is a practice of watching and stilling the restless mind. So a yoga practitioner, I'll say a yoga warrior like Arjuna, on the field of life will ask, what part of me never changes? What part of me is indestructible? So I used to think of myself in one way. Now I think of myself differently. My thoughts about myself are subject to change. And therefore, if I believe I'm the lead character in my story, I'm bound to be disappointed. So we'll see how to help Arjuna understand that he exists beyond the play of form of this world. Krishna will differentiate between what he calls the field, kshetra, and the knower of the field, kshetragya. The field is the body and everything connected to the body. And that includes our senses, our thoughts, our feelings, our desires, our will, and all the transformations that these may go through in life. The field Krishna is speaking about is the field of perception. Krishna explains that we, the true self, are the knower of the field. That means we're distinct from the field. Now, Krishna is telling Arjuna that we're not this physical body, and we're not the temporary sensations we may experience through that body either. We're not the good or so-called bad thoughts we may have, nor are we any of the things of this world that we may perceive or desire or identify with. We are spiritual beings beyond the transient play of form of this world. So don't look for yourself in the field of perception. Whatever you see there is not who you are. You and I are the knower of the field. This is a very powerful teaching that Krishna gives. That shift of perception allows us not to look for ourselves in the field of perception. And that frees us from suffering associated with time. So, I want to share a story with you that I first heard in India as a young boy. And it made quite an impression on me. And for that reason, it's directly related to this particular verse that we find in the Gita. on true identity, the identity of the self beyond the play of form of this world. So one day, while wandering through narrow lanes, a woman spotted a beautiful object in the window of an antique shop. It was an ornate bird cage. That bird cage had 24 pillars, and the entire cage had been carefully carved from a single block of jade. And it had perches of ivory, and the cage floor sparkled like a mirror, reflecting the dome, which had a turquoise ceiling. So the woman asked eagerly, "Where is this cage from? How much is it?" And the shopkeeper confided this bird cage actually belonged once to a great Mughal emperor who ruled India. It's really a rare collector's item. So the woman paid a large sum for the cage, and she took her collectible home and placed it in the hall where it could be admired easily. And she thought to herself, the cage could do with a little polish to bring out its splendid colors. So she spent all evening carefully cleaning the ornate antique. And as she was doing that, she was marveling at its beauty. She felt that the cage must be worth a lot more than she had actually paid for it. And she was so enamored by her antique that she failed to see a little hummingbird inside the cage. This hummingbird had its chest was a dazzling green, and the hummingbird hovered in the center of the cage like an emerald suspended in the air. "Feed me, please feed me," the hummingbird sang softly. But the woman paid no heed. She only saw the cage. That night, the woman dreamed of royal cages, the prized possessions of Mughal princes and mighty Maharajas. But of all the cages she saw in her dreams, none matched the one she possessed. When she woke up, she went straight to her antique, and she admired her possession for a long while. And she was so taken by the cage and its beauty that she again failed to hear the bird's plaintive cry, "Feed me, please feed me." The lady only saw the cage. She thought to herself, "I must arrange a party so that I can show off my new antique to my friends." So she went through her address book and invited all the influential people she knew. She sent out invitations. She could hardly contain her excitement. It would be a spectacular event. So she continued cleaning the cage until it sparkled like a pin. And she decided to buy several yards of fine silk brocade for the cage. And all night she stayed up sewing. In the early morning, she stood back to admire her work. "What a splendid collectible," she said to herself. "Feed me, please feed me." The hummingbird cried out feebly. But again, the lady only had eyes for the cage. She never saw the starving bird begging for food within. So, putting on her apron, she then went about preparing for Sunday, baking currant buns and iced fairy cakes. This would surely be an event to remember. And soon guests began arriving in twos and threes, and they gathered around the draped object, now positioned in the center of the room. Glowing with excitement, the lady unveiled her new collectible for all to admire. The ornate cage, gleaming in the sunlight from the window, caught everyone's attention, and the guests marveled at the object. But a little girl began to cry. "What's wrong, What's wrong, my dear?" her mother asked, trying to console her. And the little girl pointed to the cage floor. Lying on its side, the hummingbird, without food for days, closed its eyes. Its little wings were still. "Feed me, please feed me," It whispered with its last breath, and the tiny bird's heartbeat came to a stop. The guests looked at each other in shock and discomfort. One guest dropped her sandwiches. The owner of the cage fell silent, embarrassed at her absent-mindedness. She had so admired the jade collectible. How could she not have noticed the dying bird inside? So in the story, the pampered cage with its 24 rib-like pillars is the body and everything connected to the body. And in Sankhya philosophy, which we find in the Gita, there are 24 elements, 24 constituents that create the field of perception. And the bird is the soul, the immortal. The bird is the self. We think this body is everything, and so we tend to focus on the body but starve the soul within. And most of the things we seek out in our life relate to the body and our identity in our small human story. Money, influence, achievements, the admiration and approval of others, the acceptance of others. But all the vanities of life can't satisfy the soul. And as a result, we feel a great lack that can be difficult to identify. We don't know the cause, but the feeling is nonetheless strong. It doesn't go away. We long to fill the emptiness in our heart. And that emptiness is the hunger of the soul. And the purpose of yoga is to nourish the soul and set her free so that she can express her own true nature. Now, this story is it's an analogy. So, although the emerald-colored hummingbird dies in the cage, the eternal self is beyond birth and death. It's the physical body that may perish and that goes through an aging process, but the eternal self is immortal, and that's Krishna's teaching. So, in that sense, the story is it doesn't capture that point, but what it teaches us is the attention we might place on the externals, the expectation, living up to the expectations of others, trying to win the approval of others, trying to accumulate. We enter this world as an infant, completely naked, with no possessions, and we will leave this life without being able to take anything with us. But between our naked birth and our final moments, we accumulate and begin thinking in terms of I and mine. And we live the life that's represented by the blind emperor Dhritarashtra, unable to see the needs of the self, unable to see our true identity as the spark of divine consciousness that resides within the body, which is like a cage. So Krishna will continue teaching, continue on this particular topic of the nature of the self. And this reminds me, actually, the way in which we look for happiness and fulfillment in the field of perception. It reminds me actually of, I'm going to share a little anecdote with you. One time, my wife and I, we spent some time in Yorkshire. We were at a professor's home, and part of the deal was that we would look after her home and look after her border terrier while she was away. So this was a beautiful house facing the Yorkshire moors. If any of you have been to that part of England, it's just beautiful countryside. Now, every morning we would take the professor's dog, whose name was Charlie. We would take him out on a walk. And he was like a ball of fur with a peculiar but very sweet personality. And on these walks in the stunning moors, I'd often be lost in thoughts, often on the poetic verses of the Gita, actually, which is why I remember this event. And suddenly I would look around, and Charlie was nowhere to be seen. And I would call his name anxiously, Charlie, Charlie. And I would be scanning the moors in every direction. You can imagine losing someone's dog on the Yorkshire moors. So wondering what to do, I would then inadvertently, I would glance down to the ground beneath my feet, and to my utter surprise, I would discover Charlie. So he had this ability to silently follow you, not in front of you, not behind you, but directly between your feet. And I guess because I was meditating on the verses of, reflecting on the verses of the Gita, it struck me that we may spend an entire lifetime searching for happiness. And we work very hard to find it. As soon as we fulfill one of our desires, which we think will make us happy, another one emerges like in an endless chain. So we're always looking in every possible direction for fulfillment except the most obvious one. Our happiness doesn't exist somewhere in the future. It lies right here within our own being. And that's the very last place we often think to look. So now, whenever I become distracted or I find myself looking for happiness in the future, in future outcomes and events, in things, in accomplishments, I check myself and I remember Charlie. And I say to myself, you're looking for Charlie again. Stop looking for Charlie. So our habit of looking outside of ourselves for happiness can even enter our yoga practice or our spiritual practice. We're on a yoga journey, but it isn't a voyage to a distant location. The self is not something far away that we need to travel to, nor something we need to become. We're the self already. So our journey is therefore really a journey of knowledge. It's a journey of remembering. The Kena Upanishad refers to awakened knowledge, pratibodha jnana, awakened knowledge. So yoga helps us out of our forgetfulness of who we truly are. Like the quality of fire is heat, and the natural quality of water is wetness. And so the natural quality of the self is happiness. And not a shallow, temporary happiness, but a deep and abiding fulfillment that doesn't depend upon the play of form in this world. Krishna explains that a person who truly knows the sacred self finds complete fulfillment and contentment in the self. In the Bhagavad Gita, he describes a person who has realized the self as Atmarati or Atmatripta, finding happiness, being satisfied or fulfilled by the self. And a yogi or a yogini can directly experience this happiness through her daily yoga practice. In other words, we don't need to look outside of ourselves for fulfillment. Now, that's because happiness is our natural state when illusion is removed or stripped away. And therefore, the way to happiness is not to try to create it, but to seek everything that obstructs it. Krishna will go on to explain in later verses that the soul of the universe, the self of the self, is the source of our consciousness. So by turning inwards to that source, we find true fulfillment. And as we'll see, this kind of inward-looking perception is what is known as yoga. So we'll stop here, and very much looking forward to Krishna's teachings as they unfold, which we will explore in upcoming episodes. Thank
you. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Simon, for joining us today. Again, we always appreciate your insights. Just kind of reflecting on what you've shared with us today. I would say we're always in our small human story, right? Like you said, heavily attached to the past, the present, right? Like
Right.
that's where our mind is. Um, kind of thinking about that in terms of our true self, would you think it's helpful for us to try to adopt some practices that are going to help us identify with our, small human reality a little bit less? Or is that, something we should also value, and to what extent?
Yes, absolutely. So, one particular practice that really, really helps is any form of meditation. Now, meditation might seem a complex thing for someone who's new to it, but it's actually very simple. There are different types of meditation, which we will explore in other episodes as well. For example, there's mantra meditation. There are various types of meditations for engendering particular emotions and qualities. For example, gratitude meditations, loving kindness meditations, many, and some are more esoteric than others. But one type of meditation, or like you could say the bedrock of meditation, is not trying to remove thoughts, but being able to learning how to observe them. So we can sit in stillness, and if we have thoughts, we can observe them. And then what happens then is you begin to see that we are not those particular thoughts. Those thoughts or emotions that we might be experiencing, they're not who we are. They're part of the field of perception. That is an incredibly freeing observation or experience. Because as you said, we're heavily invested in our small human story. We're taking things very seriously. And so that what that does is it makes us believe the story that we're living out. Um, we become invested in it ever more so, much like what's happening at Kurukshetra. So Dhritarashtra is heavily invested in his small human story. But any practice of meditation allows us, and it can be short, just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, step outside of our story and just watch it from a place of complete neutrality, being able to observe our thoughts in that way, like passing, they're like almost like passing clouds. It allows us to see that we are something we might not fully understand yet, but it allows us to see we are something that's different or separate from the play of form, including our thoughts that come and go in the field of perception. Another something else that very much helps, and this may seem very simple, but it's actually highly effective, and that's the ability to laugh. In particular, the ability to laugh at ourselves a little bit and see what some teachers sometimes call the beautiful foolishness of life, and the beautiful foolishness of our own human story that's playing out. The ability to laugh and to laugh at ourselves in a humorous and kind way gives us some detachment, allows us to see that there is a play of form that's occurring in the field of perception, but the true self, the soul, exists beyond and apart from it.
Thank you so much, Simon. Yeah, a lot of what you're describing definitely seems like really helpful tools. And we really look forward to continuing to explore this in future discussions. So, again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Sienna.
Thank you so much as well to everyone who was listening today, Colleen, Sachi, and everyone else. We really appreciate your presence in these classes. And remember, if something you heard resonated with you, if there's anything you'd like to explore at a deeper level, you can always send us a message on Instagram at Ashram Talks ENG to ask any questions you have or connect with our speakers outside of our regular weekly classes. So thanks again to everyone who joined, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.